Hey everyone, we are back, and I am so excited to welcome back Jesús Ramirez, one of the greatest Photoshop teachers that I've personally ever known. You just bring a ton of knowledge and value to this community, and I'm thrilled you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. And yeah, man, thanks for having me. It's super exciting to be back here with you and Design Cuts yet again. And hopefully people enjoy the compositing session for today.
Without further ado, Jesús, over to you, man.
Over to me. What we're going to work on today is a composite, and during this compositing stream, I'm going to show you different compositing tips and tricks. You're going to see how I handle certain compositing situations and what to do, and hopefully that can inspire you to solve your own problems with your own compositing work. Also, I'm going to show you how to bring in overlays to enhance composites. We're going to use some Design Cuts assets, which are super, super cool. And I guess we're going to get right to it. This is going to be my background image, and obviously it's an image of Dubai. And what I want to do is I want to create this superhero theme. I don't know, Tom, if you've been watching the show Boys on Amazon, but
The Boys.
The Boys, yes, thank you. The Boys, yes.
It's good, right?
Yeah, it's really good. So I've had I'm a big superhero fan. So I thought, would it be cool to have like a superhero type of, Stormfront kind of character with lightning and all that flying in front of this futuristic looking city. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about color grading, about masking, about all the different things that you can do to make two images seem like they're one single asset or one single photo. And we'll start right at the beginning. We'll start by just removing the background from our main character's photo. There's a lot of ways to remove backgrounds in Photoshop, but these days, in my opinion at least, there's basically two ways you could go about it. If you want to get the sharpest, best possible lines ever, you can use the curvature pen tool and create a path to create a vector mask, or you can use a layer mask. And the advantage of using a layer mask is that it's much faster. The disadvantage is that it's not going to be as sharp. So in this case, as we don't have a whole lot of time, we're going to go with the layer mask option. And to do that these days in Photoshop 2020 and newer, and the reason I say newer is there's been two versions of Photoshop released since for 2020. So there was Photoshop 2020 released in October of 2019, and Photoshop 2020, and I forget the number, like 20 point whatever, released in June. And in those two versions, there is something called Adobe Sensei, which is Adobe's artificial intelligence machine learning technology that looks over the image and it removes the background. And all you need to do is, with a background layer selected, you need to make sure that you unlock it. And in the properties panel, you'll see this quick action remove background button. You can click on that and the artificial intelligence will remove the background. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but for one click, I would say it's pretty good just for one single click.
And that was like a pretty busy background as well.
Yeah, it's not like
amazes me.
Yeah, it's not like it was, she was up against a white background in a studio. It's just, it does a good job. And I know that if you zoom in, you're going to see some imperfections, and that's okay. We're going to work on these imperfections. For example, there's a lot of jagged edges. And what you can do is just double click on the layer mask. That brings up the selected mask workspace. I have the view set to black and white so that I can see essentially my layer mask. White reveals, black conceals. And what I'm going to do is just work on the edges, and I'm just going to smooth those edges just so that they're not so jagged. And it looks like, I don't know why my computer is showing me the there we go. It's showing me
nice.
It was showing me the image, not the white space, but it's not as jagged anymore. I'm also going to shift the edge inward and maybe add a little bit of contrast to sharpen those edges, and I'll press OK. And once I do that, and I don't know why my computer's actually being a little bit on the slow side today, but it's not as jagged anymore. And one thing that you can do if you start seeing those lines, and I'm thinking it's because this is a giant photo, but if you start seeing fringing and those edges, another thing that you can do is go into Filter, Other, Minimum, and then you can just increase this value here until you see I'm going to do a larger value so you can see, but once I push that in, you're going to see the edge of the mask move inward like so. And obviously you don't want to go that deep. maybe a couple pixels just so that you get rid of that edge that we had. We had this edge there. You see that edge? How that outline there, that dark outline from the background?
Yeah, that halo.
We just want to remove that, and using the minimum filter allows you to do that very, very easily. There's two algorithms in here. There's the roundness algorithm, which is what I have selected, and a squareness algorithm. If you're masking out a man-made object, like a building, car, keyboard, whatever it is, something with a lot of sharp edges and corners, you want to select squareness as the algorithm because it helps you preserve those corners. And if you're working with an organic object, in most cases, you're gonna want to select roundness because there's not a lot of corners in a person. So this is where we want to be.
That makes sense. You're not only often a beta tester, I think, for many of Adobe's software, but you've actually helped train their own team. So you train the team that create the software.
I've done a couple of sessions for internally for Adobe on their software in the past. That's correct. Super cool. So obviously here we're gonna have to work with the hair is not perfect, and we also have a lot of other issues here that I'm not liking. But what I'm gonna do right now, before I even start worrying about these details, is I'm gonna place her in the background where we're gonna have her in, just because I don't want to spend time working on details that I'm either not going to need, or once I scale her, those details may actually maybe fix themselves. You know what I mean? Since this is a very large image, maybe once we're working with the actual background, we can worry less about some of these finer details. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new document, and I'm going to go into art and illustration, and we'll select the postcard preset, and I'll click on create. That way we work on a portrait style canvas, because I'm thinking of a movie poster type of thing, maybe like an Instagram post or like an Instagram story. So I'm going to go portrait rather than landscape. And what I'll do is I'll first click and drag the background into that tab, release, and there's my background. I'll place it wherever I think looks nice, and maybe right, I kind of like this tower here to be on that first third of the image. So maybe right about there. And notice that we're missing some sky here. There's something that you can do. You can just go into the rectangular marquee tool, make a selection on top of that. There's two ways you can do this. The old method is by holding shift and backspace and selecting content aware to fill that area in. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit and select content aware fill, and that brings up the new content aware fill dialog box. And the advantage of using this is not only you get a preview of the final result, but you can see what the areas that Photoshop is sampling to generate that fill. In this case, it did a really good job. I really don't need to change it. But notice that Photoshop is taking into consideration the buildings. So maybe sometimes when you do this, you might see part of the building sticking up there in the sky somewhere. And if that's the case, you just have to erase the building from the sampled areas. And then Photoshop will regenerate the image. And then those little elements from the sky will be gone, and only the sky will be sampled.
And are you automatically on that kind of eraser option?
Yes, very good question, Tom. Yes, automatically you should be on the sampling brush, and you should have this minus option selected. Adding to your question, Tom, if you wanted to add, so for example, if in this case I wanted to sample something in specific, what I could do is select the plus icon and then just paint over that area that I do want to sample. And then Photoshop again will analyze the image and fill with using those sampled pixels.
That's so good, because content aware blew my mind when I first saw it, but it's not perfect. We've all done it where we use it and suddenly you got like half a guy's face that's a stranger in the background, and it looks like a Dali painting or something. So that's an amazing level of control.
And actually, what a lot of people don't, and I'm not going to get into this because I guess it's now relevant, but I'll briefly mention that in the old way of using content aware fill, there's actually a way that you could do. I mean, maybe somebody's watching using an old version of Photoshop, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically, if you would select content aware, you could go into the channels panel, and from the channels panel, you could create basically a channel, right? And then you would just make a mask on the area that you would want Photoshop to sample from, and you will fill that with white, and then create a layer mask based on this, and then that's what Photoshop will use to sample in the fill. You know what I mean? So then I would just apply it as a layer mask here. Oops, I didn't load it as a selection. I would just apply that as a layer mask here, and then Photoshop would just use the visible pixels, not the invisible pixels, to sample. But that was too difficult. Nobody knew about it. It's much easier now.
Amazing. I never realized Dubai looks so much like a scene out of Blade Runner, by the way. It's like really futuristic looking.
Yeah. It's usually when I'm doing composites and I want the futuristic looking city, I usually end up picking Dubai because they just have such modern looking buildings. Cool. But yeah, it looks like I kind of peeked over at the chat, and it looks like people are enjoying these techniques. Awesome. So this is going to be my background, and notice that now this top part is filled, and now I can go back and bring in my model in here and just drop her in. And as you can see, she is pretty big compared to my scene. So I'm just gonna, by the way, that trick right there, if you're zoomed into a layer and you press Control T, Command T to transform, you can't see the handles, right? So if you press Control 0 on Windows, Command 0 on the Mac, you zoom out so that you can see all the handles. See that? And then you can
so useful. I can't tell you the number of times I've just been zooming out, being like, where are they?
Yeah, where are they? Yeah, it's a pretty cool useful keyboard shortcut. So now I'm just sort of scaling and trying to figure out how big she'll be in my scene, And in this case, I don't usually, for example, if I were trying to place her, maybe if I was creating a scene where she was a giant, I would definitely need to think about perspective and figure out if the perspective would work. In this case, I don't have to worry about it since she's floating. So perspective almost becomes irrelevant because there's no ground plane for her to stand on. She's flying. So I can be much looser in how I place her in the scene. As opposed to if I had to make sure that it seemed like she was actually planting her feet on the ground, then I would have to worry about perspective. But in this case, I don't have to worry about any of that. So I can just place her in the scene and scale her accordingly. So now that I've made her smaller, I can actually come back in here and see if I do need to refine some of those details and see how now the mask is looking better. It's not perfect, but it's looking better. So I can go back into selected mask, and maybe we can smooth it a bit more. And maybe add more contrast to sharpen those edges, and shift the edge in just a tiny little bit. And I'll press OK. And that looks already much, much better. If I need to, and usually I would do this in real life if I was doing a project, is I would go back and just fix areas like this. Just paint over those areas with white. A trick that you could use is click and hold Shift and click again, and Photoshop will draw a straight line in between the first point that you clicked on and the second point that you clicked on. I guess I could show it here. I can click once, hold Shift, click again, and Photoshop draws a straight line. So it's very useful for going back in there and refining your mask. Another thing that I like doing is I like holding Shift and clicking on the layer mask so I can see my original background and see what type of areas I need to fix. Like her shoulder here, it's got this weird dent. So I could easily fix that just by selecting a round brush like I have and set the hardness to maybe a little bit more, the hardness to 100%, and increase the size a little bit more. And then I could just come in.
I thought she just had a particularly muscular upper arm popping out the side there. I was like, damn, superpower.
Yeah, if you want to mold her arm and make her seem like she's super powerful, then that's cool too. But anyway, obviously I'm not going to spend a lot of time working on those. I don't like this tower here now, so I'm probably going to have to move this over to the left, but it's going to create that problem there. But that's not an issue. I can just fill it with content aware. And I'll just click on OK, and there it is. And I have my content aware set to new layer, which is why it keeps creating these new layers. I don't need so many layers, so I'll just delete the bottom one. In this case, I am working quote unquote destructively, but I'm not taking away pixels. I'm adding pixels, so it's no big deal to work destructively in this case. But anyway, I'll place her right about here, and let's work on her hair now. This, as you mentioned earlier, Tom, the background is quite busy, and there's really no definition, maybe only in this black area, between the her hair in the background. So no masking technique will really be able to select these pixels, or at least select them accurately, or select them so that they look natural and normal. So instead, what I'm going to do is just select the brush tool. And with the brush tool, you can bring the hardness all the way down, set the size to 1 pixel, and then you can paint in hair on a new layer. And I'm going to hold Alt and Windows Option in the Mac with the brush tool selected so that I can sample a color and then just paint in her hair. I'm using a mouse right now, but I could easily switch over into my Wacom tablet and I could just do it better. So I recommend having a Wacom tablet or using a Wacom tablet for this step. If you have one, if not, you can use a mouse, but a Wacom tablet obviously would make this part a little easier, just because you don't have to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is something that always bugs me. When you zoom in and you get this grid that kind of obscures, is there a way to hide that?
Yeah, and it's under Control K, Command K on the Mac. And let me see if I remember exactly where it is. It's under Grids and Guides, I think. No, is it? Or you know what? Actually, no, Tom, I think I'm confused. I think it's under View, Extras, Show, Pixel Grid. Here it is. I was confused. It's under View, Pixel Grid. There it is.
Because it always annoyed me when I zoomed in and wanted to do precise work. I'm like, all I can see is this freaking grid.
Yeah. View. I already forgot. Show grid. Pixel Grid. Pixel Grid. Yeah. So what I was showing earlier is I was remembering that there was a guides, grid, and slices option, but this is just to show the different colors of the different items in the. For example, like we were looking at the pixel grid, not the grid, which is different. But if I wanted to change the, I'll show you what the other grid is in a moment. But you could also customize the grids and subdivisions and the color of the guides. You know how the guides are that cyan color? If you wanted them to be a different color, this is where you would change the color of the guides. If you don't know what a guide is with the ruler enabled, you can click and drag and place a guide, and you see how it's cyan. You could change the color if you wanted to from that other menu. So I just didn't remember if the pixel grid was also in that menu or in the view menu. Another cool tip.
Thank you, lifesaver.
Yeah. No problem. Another cool tip is if sometimes you're working so fast and you drag out a guide and you're like, oh no, I meant to drag like a horizontal guide. So then you would have to drag this vertical guide out and then drag this one back in. But a shortcut that a lot of people don't know is when you drag a guide out, if you wanted the opposite, in this case, if you wanted a horizontal guide, you can hold Alt and Windows Option on the Mac and see how it flips. So you can flip it, and now you can just work on that one without having to remove it and bring down another guide. But anyway, that was just a little side conversation about grids and guides. But yeah, Tom, that's totally right. If you zoom in too far, you will see that pixel grid, and it could be difficult to see.
Super helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What the banana is?
So the banana tool is it doesn't do anything. It's an Easter egg that's Photoshop engineers hid it in there for fun. So usually you see that 3-dot icon in Photoshop. I want to say 20. I'm not going to remember properly, but about Photoshop 2015 and newer, I think, is when this edit toolbar icon was added. So if you see that 3-dot icon, you can add a banana, and you can go into edit toolbar, and if you hold Shift and click on done, it will place the banana in the toolbar in Photoshop. And when I do, because I do a lot of Adobe live streams, and we have a little group, and we call it the banana group, because I tell them you can only watch the stream if you have a banana on the toolbar.
Okay, everyone, get your bananas ready. Otherwise,
otherwise you have to log off. Yeah, Photoshop will automatically log you off if you don't have the banana tool. But anyway, the point is that now you have to paint in all this hair, and I'm not going to spend the time to do it. But then that's what you would do in a situation like this, where hair is so difficult to select that you would just have to put that in there. Another thing that you can do, and this is a little bit more advanced, but I guess I'll briefly mention it, is you can create your own hair brushes. And what I mean by that is you can, I guess I can use this curly one that I already have. Oops, here. That's super giant, of course. I'll show you the result, and then I'll show you how I made it. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to just paint. And you see how it just looks like hair? It's just an outline of hair. So you can just create your own brushes and, then just transform it so that, and obviously this is curly hair that I'm using, but, and you'll get the idea. I'm going to place it behind her. And now you have, those hair strands coming out. You see that? And I guess I can make it darker so that you could see what it really looks like. But the point is now that I place that hair in there, it looks a little more realistic rather than just painting it by hand. And especially when you zoom out, on a piece like that, this is actually the 100% view right here.
Yeah.
So it's nobody's going to tell that it was just fake hair from a brush. If you want to make hair like that, I'll quickly go over the process just because I guess I mentioned it, so now I have to do it. But let me see if I have a library here. I know that I have hair strands in here somewhere.
So, I love what a natural teacher you are, Jesus. Whenever you mention something, you're like, I got to teach it now.
Yeah, because people want to learn. So basically, you can find pictures of hair that are easy to extract, right? So I have all these photos here, and then we could use this one. I know that I've used this one in the past, and I know it'll work. So I have her, right? But I don't really need her. I just need her hair. So I can just crop the image like so here. Then I can go into the channels panel, and I can look for the channel that has the most contrast between the foreground and background. I can duplicate the layer, and then I can go into image, adjustment, levels, and I said layer is a channel. Duplicate the channel, image, adjustments, and levels, and then you can make the background white and the foreground, which is her hair, as black as possible, like so. And then you can go into edit. Actually, I got to go back into the layers panel. I got to click on RGB, then go back into the layers panel, and then go into, whoops, not doing it right. Sorry, guys. You got to load the selection from my blue copy, go back into the layers panel, and then fill with black. Fill with black on a new layer. And oh my God, I'm not getting it right. Now I have to invert the selection and fill with black. There we go. That's what I want. And the reason it looks red is probably because I have the blue copy enabled. But if I disable it, it should be black. And there it is. So that's the hair right there. And now, now that I have that, I can define it as a brush preset. You can call it whatever you want, hair, and there it is. See that? So now I can go into any composite. Where's my composite? Is this my composite? No, that's the yeah, this is my composite. So now I can go into my composite, and in a new layer behind there, I can paint with that brush. And notice that the photo that I used was giant, which is perfect because now I have the flexibility of increasing and decreasing my brush size. And I'll delete but hide the other brush layers just so that it's more obvious. And
this hair looks more similar to hers.
Yeah, exactly. So I can just place that there like so. Something like this, right? And I obviously need to color match it. And there's a lot of ways you could do that. In this case, probably the easiest way is to maybe select her actual hair color and then lock the transparent pixels and just fill. So if you can fill with the foreground color by holding Alt backspace, Option backspace on the Mac. And obviously you can come in there and keep fine tuning it. But the point is that, now I have this more natural hair. And another thing that you can do, since I have the transparent pixels active, I can actually come in there and select different hair colors and then paint, probably with a different brush now, but paint in other areas with different color, like so. Maybe this hair strand sticking out, maybe it's not so dark, or maybe it is dark, maybe it's darker. I don't know. You can play around with it all day long, obviously. But that's what I would do to get hair back into a photo, because sometimes selecting is too difficult. And I see people spending hours trying to select something that's just never going to work and it's never going to look natural. So it's much, much easier to just disregard it entirely and paint it back in either by hand or by using a brush like I just did here.
I love that. And obviously you've just broken down the whole process, but the whole process for you, I'm guessing, would take you a couple of minutes, right? You just hit
Yeah.
the selection tool, and then you select a hairbrush, add it in, and it's like job done. It's so quick.
Yeah, and here's an extra tip. So something that you can do is you can create a new library, and I'm talking about it, so might as well, and call it like, my cool brushes or something, whatever you wanna call it. And then you can go into your brushes panel, so window, brushes, and for example, the one that I made should be at the very bottom of your hair. You can click and drag that one into your library, and there it is. So now you can have a library with all your hair brushes, and when you want to use them, you can just click on them from here. And you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between having them in the libraries panel or having them in the brushes panel? The libraries panel follows you everywhere you go. So I'm working on my desktop now, but then maybe I, pick my backpack up and then I go to a coffee shop or travel somewhere, and I want to keep working on the same project or a different project. My brush is still there with me. The Creative Cloud just has all your assets in one place. Also, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe you can also pick it from the libraries panel in Fresco, which is Adobe's drawing application. I do know for sure that the file format is the same, so it will work on there. I'm just not really sure if you'll be able to select it from Fresco, but I believe that you can.
You know what? I would say 99.9% of people don't realize how powerful this software is. So it's always really inspiring to watch someone like you that really kind of pushes so much of the functionality that's often unexplored.
Yeah, and especially with the Creative Cloud, I think that a lot of people don't see the power of having assets everywhere you go. Like, for example, I guess this is somewhat related. I have a Creative Cloud library. Let me see. I called it PTC assets for my YouTube channel. So I have graphics that I often use. Like, for example, my photo. If somebody ever needs my photo for something, if I need to use an Adobe logo for something, I'm now sponsored by MSI. So if I need to use the MSI logo I have everything here. You know what I mean? Like,
that's so useful.
Stuff for my YouTube channel. So anything I need, it's in this. Actually, another fun fact, I have every single toolbar icon as a vector in this folder, toolbar icon for Photoshop, that is, as a vector in case I need something. I have my logo, I have the live banner, anything I need, it's here. And I just, no matter what computer I'm working from, if I create an asset, I can put it in there. And no matter what computer I go to, I can log in and use that asset. And maybe I come over for, I guess, tea at your place, Tom, since you're in England, and I don't bring my laptop with me. I can still have access to my assets by going into assets.adobe.com, assets.adobe.com. And I guess I'll go there and show you guys.
If you teach me Photoshop in person, I'll make you the nicest cup of tea ever.
I'll take you. I'll take that offer. But yeah, so all that is here. See, libraries, and all my libraries are going to show in here, including the ones that I was just talking about, and everything is there. So it's a big advantage, including the brush that we put on there.
Game changing.
Yep. Anyway, back to the composite. So I'm not going to spend too much time working on her hair since we got about half an hour. But that's the process that I would go through to get realistic looking hair on a cutout like that. I'm going to place her into a group, and I'll just call her Hero, if I spelled that correctly. Did I? Is that? Yeah, there we go. Anyway, I'll just remove these layers. So there she is. She's hovering and flying over this this city. Something that we can do now is we can start enhancing the image as a whole. One thing that I was sort of fortunate with, I don't really have to do too much color matching since the feel of the background and foreground is very similar. If you don't know what I mean by that, a trick that you can do is create a solid color fill layer. Select a gray. Most people select 50% gray, but to be frank with you, it really doesn't matter. And then you can set that layer into luminosity, which will make all the luminance values the same, 50% gray, and you can only see the color of the image. And you can see how the color overall is virtually the same. I could also use a hue and saturation adjustment layer to increase that. And notice that the color values that are found in the background are very similar to the foreground. They might not be exactly the same, but they're close enough that I probably don't have to worry too much about color matching. Let me show you. Let me just artificially change the color values here so that you could see the difference. So if she were, you know, in a different scene, actually, you know what? I'll colorize it, make her blue, and now she's like in a, you know, she's got a blue, maybe like a night scene or something. You'll see now that there's a lot more blue in the tones, and I will need to color match. But the original photo is actually very similar to the background, so I don't have to worry about color matching. So, but that's one way you can check. So I don't have to worry about the color matching. But another thing that I like to check, and you know what, I'm going to show you guys something that I never showed anywhere because I've been doing a lot of thinking about something. And usually I tell people to do one of two things. I tell people to go into the black and white adjustment layer to make the image black and white so you can see the luminance values of the image. Another thing that I've seen people do, which I don't do, is use the hue and saturation adjustment layer and desaturate the image. But I've been thinking a lot lately about which two methods is the best. And I recently started thinking, I actually now considering to use the Vibrance adjustment layer and desaturate. And you might be thinking, well, why? You know, they're all, you get a black and white image, right? But if you really look at it, it's really not the same result. And you might be thinking, well, who cares? One's a little darker, one's a little brighter. And I did a video recently on my YouTube channel talking about the difference between the HSB color mode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can open up the color picker and you can see the HSB values, hue, saturation, brightness values here. Hue is what color we're talking about, red, blue, green, whatever it is. Saturation is the intensity. Is it really, really intense or is it gray? And brightness, I think, is the easiest one to explain. Is it bright or is it dark? So that's what HSB is. And there's another color mode called HSL, hue, saturation, and luminosity. And that's what the Vibrance adjustment layer uses, as where hue and saturation uses HSB. So I'm trying to figure out which is the best one to use. And the reason that I'm thinking about this, and I'm kind of going to my thought process that I never really like shared anywhere on why I would do that for a composite, is because if I have something like this, right? And I use the hue and saturation adjustment layer, notice that you get nothing but gray values, right? Everything is gray. And if I use the Vibrance adjustment layer, I actually see different shades. But why is that? Why is one giving me, you know, different levels of gray as for one gives me complete gray? And the reason is that and I'm sorry, I misspoke. The hue and saturation adjustment layer uses HSL, and the Vibrance adjustment layer uses HSB. But the point is that the hue and saturation adjustment layer is looking at everything mathematically, meaning if all the lightness values are the same, then all the grays should be the same because you're removing the hue and the saturation from the photo. So they're all the same, right? I mean, it makes mathematical sense. Now, does that make sense to you, Tom? That if we have a specific hue and a specific saturation, but we remove the saturation, as long as the lightness is the same, we're going to have the same gray. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. My brain slightly hurts, but yeah, I'm with you.
All right. So then now we have this level of this method of desaturating the image. So Vibrance makes less sense conceptually, like mathematically, but it makes more sense as a person. So visually, this was made to sort of mimic the way humans perceive color. In other words, when you look at this, they all mathematically have the same brightness. But to a person, to most humans, assuming you don't have any, type of color blindness, all these shades of color feel darker and brighter depending on which ones you look at. I think the biggest contrast is between the yellow and the blue. Yellow feels brighter than blue, although mathematically they're not in this case. So the yellow in here and the blue in here mathematically are the same brightness, but to us humans, yellow feels brighter than blue. So that's what Vibrance is trying to show, that the yellow here is brighter than the blue to us, whereas the hue and saturation is just doing it mathematically and everything is the same brightness. So then it should all be the same gray. I made this big, huge, long explanation because lately when I've been doing composites, I've been thinking maybe I shouldn't use the black and white adjustment layer, which is similar to Vibrance. The downside with the black adjustment layer is that it already has these preset adjustments, so it kind of shifts colors a little bit. So anyway, so the reason that I said this whole thing was because now what I've been doing recently is thinking, if I'm going to make something black and white to show the brightness values of a photo for a composite, it might make better sense to use the adjustment layer that removes the saturation and leaves behind what a human eye perceives, because after all, my eye is making the judgment, and I'm trying to match a foreground to a background. So if I were to use a different method, I may not get the same feel and the same result. So recently, I sort of went back at everything I've said in the past and said, you know what, maybe black hue and saturation and black and white, which is what I did in the past, is probably not the best option. So I think that for the very first time, I haven't even done it in one of my tutorials, I'm telling people, maybe you should consider using the Vibrance adjustment layer, because it might give you a better visual representation of what the final piece will be, since it's not taking into account the mathematical numbers, it's taking into account the human perception of black and white. So I don't know, that was like a 5-minute deal.
But I love that explanation. And why it matters is when you're doing photo compositing like this, it's a subtle art. Like everything, you know, with matching colors, for example, you can be like a few points off and it can clash, or it can look perfect. So it really comes down to the subtleties. So I can understand why you invest so much in getting this perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And it's those little subtleties, because sometimes you're like, wait, I'm doing this right, but when I disable the hue and saturation adjustment layer, it just looks off. And I've been trying to figure out why. And this is one of the things that I've come up with. I need to do like a little more testing on it, but so far I think it's a better way to go. But in either case, to be frank with you, if you're using hue and saturation adjustment layer, 80%, 90%, even 100% of the time, you may still get good results. But I was just trying to think about those like little nuances, those little details that don't always come out right. And so far, I think this will be a better method, But again, if you want to use the old methods, totally cool. At the end of the day, what matters is the final result, not how you got there. But this could be a tool that can help you get a better result. Anyway, so now that we have a black and white adjustment layer, what I like to do is create a levels adjustment layer or curves, totally up to you. And then just adjust the brightness values to make sure that she's not too bright or she's not too dark for the scene. And again, in this case, we're really lucky that she feels like she belongs there already without making too many adjustments. Maybe the shadows are too dark. So I can bring this over to the right. Quickly to explain what this is doing, the levels adjustment layer has 5 input points. I'll start at the bottom. The bottom 2 just tell Photoshop what the darkest color of the layer should be. So by default, the darkest color should be black. But if I drag this over to the right, the darkest color is no longer black, is this shade of gray. The opposite is true on this white point. The brightest point in the layer should be white, but if I drag this to the left, the brightest point now is this shade of gray. And points on top simply control the range of pixels that are either dark or bright. So if I drag this to the right, more pixels are black. You can see how she's just basically a silhouette. And if I drag this to the right, now she's a silhouette, but not as dark. And the opposite is true on this point here. Drag to the left, more pixels are white or the brightest color. And this one controls the gamma of the image. But anyway, just play around with these and see.
I got a question about that, actually. Maybe this is ambitious thinking, but is there a way in Photoshop, because you're doing this by eye, which is fantastic. Is there a way to grab the levels graph from one image and almost copy and paste it and apply it to another?
Yeah, you could do that with the eyedroppers. I guess you could do that, but then the problem, then that becomes a different thing, because what you would do in that case, I think it might be too time consuming to be that perfect. But if you wanted to, what you could do is first figure out what the darkest color is in the background. So you would need to come in here, and then if you hold Alt on Windows Option in the Mac and drag, you can see how the image turns white, and wherever it turns black first, that's where the deepest shadows are, right? So then
that was my thinking of like almost matching the values exactly.
Yeah,
so
so
you know
it's
it's
probably
consistent.
it's probably somewhere in this building. I think that's where I first saw the black pixels appear. Maybe like that window. We could just say it's that, and then you could probably drop like a color sample there so you can remember where it is, and then go back and do the same thing for the other side and see where the image turns white first. Of course, it's going to be the sky, but I wouldn't use the sky. I would actually use one of the maybe things in the background, whatever that may be. And it looks like is this area here that is the brightest, and I can drop another sample point and I can see what the values are there, and I could just keep doing the same thing, but now with my hero image, I could see what her brightest point is, her darkest point, and then try to match those. But I think that would just be way too time consuming. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And also to be frank with you, I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just thinking about it doing it generically speaking. If I really wanted to do that on a composite, I wouldn't even look at the buildings back here because I wasn't thinking about depth. So she's in a certain point in the image, and the further back you recede on an image, the further the brightest it'll be. For example, less contrast. That's the more accurate way of saying it. For example, you see this building here. It has a lot more contrast than the buildings back here. That's because of atmospheric perspective. So I would really need to do what you suggested, basically on this bottom half of the image, because those are the brightness values that will be more relevant to her, and not the buildings that I selected back here because they're further back in the image. So if I really, really wanted to be that precise, I would also have to be that precise selecting the right parts of the image. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. It's like a science. I love it, man.
Yeah, and this is what like 3D programs and all that stuff do. But in Photoshop, to be frank with you, you can just most of us can tell if this is too bright and that this is too dark, and then that the real problem comes into play when it's like right about here. Is that too dark? Is that too bright? And you can just keep playing with it. One thing I should mention is that you should always use the luminosity blending mode, and the reason that you want to do that is, and I'll show you an extreme example, and I'll use curves because it shows it better. If you are adjusting curves or levels on an image, and actually I shouldn't do it that way, maybe I should do it this way. I'm trying to see what gives me the best result. Maybe something like that. If you're adjusting the brightness on an image, you also inadvertently adjust saturation. So if you change it to luminosity, see how it's just brighter, and with normal, it's more saturated. So I always set the blending mode to luminosity because I don't want to inadvertently adjust the luminance values. Another thing
that's a huge tip, actually. So definitely one for the notepads, everyone watching at home.
Definitely. Another thing that I would recommend doing is for something like this, and I know we've gone a little slow, but that's okay. I'm looking at the composite, and you know what? I'm going to have to move this again because I kind of like how there's this bright. I'm trying to figure out what the best spot will be. And yeah, I guess we'll leave it here. I just like this bright area here. And what I want to do is I want to show you guys something that for some reason Adobe hides. I'll show you the old way of doing something, and I'll show you the way that theoretically should be better, but it's not because Adobe hides stuff for some reason. But I'm going to just select all these layers and put them into a new layer. Control Alt Shift E on Windows, Command Shift E on the Mac, and there it is, everything in one layer. And the reason that I did that is because I'm going to go into Filter, Render, Lens Flare, and I'm just going to put a lens flare here on the side and increase the brightness. And I'm using the 105mm prime option, and there it is. It's perfect. But the problem is that this is destructive, and I want to change the color, and it doesn't work. But now that I've done it, Photoshop remembers that last action, so I can fill with black. And then just go into Filter, and the first option is always the last filter that you use. So once I do that, there it is, and I can change the blending mode, and it's fantastic. It works great. The downside is there's actually an even more precise way of doing this, but for some reason Adobe hides it. And imagine that you want it to be so perfect and say, I want my lens flare right here. And I'm going to need your help, Tom, because my memory is terrible. But if you go into the info panel and you hover over that pixel, you can see that the X coordinate is 20 and the Y coordinate is 926. So remember that, 20 and 926. And you can now create a new layer, also fill it with black. And this is what I don't get that Adobe does. If you go into filter, render, lens flare, and you hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on it, it brings up this precise layers flare center thing. And then you can just put in those values. Was it 20 and 926? When I press OK, the lens flare moves exactly to that pixel. And see that? If I zoom in, you'll see that it's exactly right there. So I don't know why Adobe hides it. To me, that takes way too long. You have to remember all these numbers. The ideal solution would be for this window to just, these input boxes, just be here, right? The filter comes up and you see those values and you can kind of know, what they're for. Maybe you don't necessarily know where to find the values, but at least you can put values in there. But who's gonna guess that you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click to bring up this thing there? And it's been like that since
I've never seen that in my life.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that Adobe hides for some reason. I'm not sure why. I did a video a long time ago, maybe like 3-4 years, on like truly hidden Photoshop features, because sometimes on YouTube people, and I guess I read them sometimes like that, but they're like really clickbaity headlines like, hidden feature in Photoshop. Well, no, it's not hidden. It's just nested under the brush tool, and I can select, like the mixer brush or whatever. That's not really hidden in my opinion. Like, to me, hidden means there is absolutely no way you'll be able to find it unless somebody tells you. You know what I mean? But you might accidentally stumble on, the background eraser tool or something because it's there. But you wouldn't stumble on that, and you're not going to go holding Alt and clicking on everything, just to find stuff. So anyway, so I got my nice little lens flare going there, and I'm going to go into Hue and Saturation, clip it to the layer below, click on Colorize, and then just find the color that matches the scene. So maybe like this nice yellow orange, It looks super cool. Let me start bringing in some elements. I know we don't have a lot of time, and let me just save this on my computer just in case something happens. And I'll bring in some stuff here. So I was able to find some really cool. This is actually really cool. I really got to plug this because I liked it a lot, Tom. So big props to you and your team and the people who created this. So you guys have something called a moon cycle pack on Design Cuts, and I didn't realize it was this good. So it's got PSDs, PNGs, JPEGs, PSD layers, all kinds of really, really cool stuff. But what I really, really liked was the moon, the brush version of the moon. So you guys have this ABR file that you can just double click and it installs inside of Photoshop. When you open up your brush tool, you'll see the moon pack here, and it's got all these different moons. And I found a couple that I thought will work great for this composite. So you can see how now I have my little moon brush. I can create a new layer. I'll create it on top of the background. And this, for me, this is not a moon. I can make like this giant planet. And actually, I guess I could use, white. So now I have a giant planet here. And then maybe I can have and you know what, since the sun is coming from this side, I guess I could rotate it, right? That would make more sense, I'm assuming. But you know what I mean? We have that sun there. And if you want to rotate a brush, by the way, you can open up the brush settings. And from the brush tip, you can just click on flip X. And now the moon is facing that way. Anyway, so now I can have like a nice another little planet here. So now we're like in this multi-planet, multi-moon world. And it was created super, super simple. Easily, no real masking, no real anything, just paint with the brush, and I think it looks good. You might want to play with the blending mode, use maybe something like overlay or soft light, whichever one you think works well, so that we can get a little bit of the atmosphere color on the moon, planet, whatever this is. But I think it's like a really, really easy way to add them. I place these both on the same layer, but to be frank with you, I'll probably do it on separate layers so I can have more control over them. But for this example, I think this is good.
Yeah, it looks super good.
The cool thing about that brush pack is that it's not just, I'll quickly show you guys. See how there's different moons? It's not the same one, just rotate or anything like that. It's different faces of the moon. See that? So maybe in this case, I don't know, maybe it would have been cool. Let's try it. I could have maybe made a planet. I don't know, like a giant planet back here. I'll put it in the middle and then I can move it. See, so now I have like this giant planet thing here, and change the blending mode to like overlay or something. You can adjust the opacity, whatever you want, but it's very easy to just create these cool planet looking things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And yeah, so yeah, check them out, guys. But anyway, so that's the one we're going to use for the composite. And again, I'm not sure if this is the best placement. I'll show you guys a couple cool things before I go.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so the next thing is there's these lightning photo overlays. And basically, I can use this one right here. And this one was so cool because I could just simply drag it over into our working composite. And look at this. It almost like matches her hands already. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I can move the pivot point. If you don't see the pivot point in Photoshop 2020, you can enable it. For some reason, Adobe decided to hide it. They call it the reference point. I call it the pivot point. But in new versions of Photoshop, it's not enabled. You have to enable it for some reason. And you can just click and drag it over to anywhere you want. And now the layer rotates from that point, or you can scale it to that point while holding Alt. So I'm scaling it so that it matches her hand. So now it looks like she's got lighting coming out of her hands. I'll place the layer on top here and change the blending mode to screen. And I think that it'll be cooler if her lightning was a different color. So again, maybe like yellow or something. So she's kind of like Stormfront in that show The Boys that we were talking about earlier.
Definitely maybe not one to watch with your kids, by the way, everyone.
Yeah, this is not Spider-Man. You definitely do not watch it with your kids. But anyway, so I'm just gonna just paint with white here, just so she's got some nice lighting. Talking about lighting, a different type of lighting, a rim light. I didn't add a rim light, but I definitely would want to add a rim light to her if this is a real project. Obviously, I'm not going to have the time to paint like a super accurate, super cool rim light. But what you would do is with white, ideally with a Wacom tablet, just come in here and clip the layer to the layer below and just paint on the edges. So that you can create the the light that's coming off the sun there. And clearly I'm going extremely fast and not super accurate, but you gotta make sure you can probably get the knee and that stuff in there and all this stuff. And I'm just adding it just so you can kind of see, even so loose and so bad, it's gonna make it look a little bit better than not having it.
I'm pretty impressed you're doing that with a mouse as well.
Oh no, I switch over into the Wacom tablet because
I was going to say, like, how are you doing that? That is witchcraft.
Yeah. But anyway, so we'll call that good, obviously, right? But what I can do now is go into like image adjustment, hue and saturation, click on colorize, make it a color that you want, and maybe make it a little yellow or something, and you can adjust the opacity. But I mean, even though it was so loosey-goosey, even just adding that little bit, I think it makes it look better. Another thing that we can bring in here from my Design Cuts pack is this is totally up to you. You have a really nice fog overlay, and since she's flying, I thought it'd be kind of cool if there was maybe some clouds or something in there. And the cool thing about the pack that you have here, Tom, is that it's already masked out for you, so you don't even have to change the blending mode if you don't want to. So you just drag it in here and then just adjust it accordingly. And this is a giant.
Yeah, I find these a lot easier to work with rather than just photos on black background where you have to use screen mode and it takes some tinkering.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is much better, and I can just use a hue and saturate. Actually, you know what? I'll place this up here. Maybe even above the lighting as well. Then I can use a hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, colorize it, make it yellow, whatever color you want to make it so that it matches your scene. And there's also another pack here that you can use. I probably won't have time to really fine tune it and make it look super cool the way that I was envisioning it in my head. Okay, cool. So I'll just show a couple more things. But anyway, so yeah, so I won't spend too much time on this. If you wanted to, you could add like a sky overlay behind the sky that you already have to kind of help match that space feel that you have. And you obviously would have to transform the layer and do all kinds of cool things. But in this case, since I don't have time to do all that, I'll just jump right into the last step, which is this all depends on your computer speed, the size of the document, how many layers you're using. But there's two things you can do. Number one is you can select all layers. And once you have all layers, and by the way, you can select all layers by clicking on the bottom one, holding shift, clicking on the top one, and while holding shift, then it'll select all the layers in between. And you can either convert it all into a smart object, and or if your computer is slower or you have a lot of layers that will slow down even a powerful computer, instead of putting everything into a smart object, you can do one of those layer merge things I did earlier, Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E. Here it is. And then convert this into a smart object. The reason that you want to do that is so that you can apply a camera raw filter, and that's always my finishing touch on everything that I do. And that allows me to control the composite as if it were an actual photo, so I can adjust the temperature, the tint, maybe add some contrast, adjust the highlights, bring more detail into the highlights, shadows, add a little bit of texture, clarity, maybe vibrance in this case. And by the way, Vibrance adds saturation to non-saturated areas, and it protects skin tones. I could also do the effects, which I always do. I always tell people that I don't like how a lot of composites feel too computer generated because they're blurry in some areas. Blurry in some areas because you may add a little bit of blur. So I can add a little bit of grain to counteract that, and it just makes it feel more cinematic, more like actual film. And in this case,
or like a poster or something like that.
Yeah, and if you notice, a lot of movie posters do have a lot of film grain. Then I can add a little bit of a vignette. And something that I sometimes do is go into the calibration, and I may adjust the blue primaries just to try to get a different shade, or the green primaries and yellow primaries. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but just with those adjustments, that's the result there.
That's so cool. And I used to have to use 10 to 20 adjustment layers to get that final, bring it all together. So the fact you do it all in one place. Yeah.
And I'll mention one last thing. So the thing I mentioned earlier was, I mentioned blurring. In some cases, you may need to take the background layers, which are these guys right here. Yeah, these right here. And you can put them into a smart object. Am I not doing this correctly? Convert to smart object. There it is. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a blur just to create some depth of field in here. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and not too much. Like that will be too much, obviously. So maybe just like a couple pixels just to make her the main focus. And think about it as a camera. The background will be a little bit blurrier. And now, how do we apply this final effect? Well, we made it into a smart object. So now I can just press Control-A to select all, Control-Shift-C to copy all, and then I can open up the smart object, paste that in there. See the difference in blurriness there in the background? Mm-hmm. Close it, save it, and that new change is applied to the image. So that's why you want to work with a smart object on that final step. In case you decide to change something, you can just copy and paste it instead of doing the whole smart object or the whole filter again.
Wow. that is my feedback. Thank you so much, Jesus. That was beyond jam-packed. I warned you guys to have the notepad out at the start. Like, that was insanely good. You always over-deliver. So thank you for just providing one of the greatest sessions we've ever had. That was incredible. Let's give it up for Jesus. Thank you again. I really mean this when I say, you're one of the greatest teachers in the community, in my opinion. You're actually just super humble with it as well. You're so giving and passionate with your time and your knowledge. So we really, really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for watching.